Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today I would like to talk about how the Nintendo Switch 2 launch lineup could be even bigger than we thought. A lot of different third-party games have been rumored to be coming out early on for Switch 2. Games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Elden Ring, Cyberpunk, and we've even started to see some different games get release dates for around the mid-May period. Games like Doom Dark Ages coming out May 15th. Games like Blades of Fire coming out May 22nd, or Fantasy Life I coming out May 21st. Now we don't know when Switch 2 is launching, but there are a lot of theories, some of which coming from myself, that mid-May may be the time Switch 2 comes out, and if not, just a little bit later. But the main point here is it does seem like a lot of different games are going to be available early on for Switch 2. But what we're focusing on today are the big first-party titles, the titles that Nintendo themselves will be putting out for the console day one. I expect that there will be games coming out consistently pretty much every single month for years to come, very similar to how they handled the Switch 1, but that day one lineup may not just be one game, it may be a few when we look throughout history, and this could be a pretty big deal, and so that's what I want to dive further into today. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out that I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers by the time the Switch 2 launches, so if you find yourself enjoying my content, I would appreciate it if you could subscribe and hit that notification bell. So right now, where most people seem to be in agreement, is that Mario Kart 9, or whatever they call the next brand new Mario Kart game that they teased in the Switch 2 reveal trailer, that game is likely going to be a launch title for Switch 2. The reason we think that is because it is the first game that they showed off for Switch 2, and we look at the Switch 1 first look trailer and the Switch OLED trailer, the first games in those trailers ended up coming out day one for those respective launches. So it seems like Nintendo is hinting that Mario Kart is going to be the launch title. It's possible it ends up not being the launch title, but right now it seems like a safer bet is to say that Mario Kart is going to be part of that launch lineup. And I want to emphasize being part of that launch lineup, because I don't think it's going to be the only game. Some people might look at Mario Kart and think, well, that is a huge, huge franchise. Mario Kart is the best-selling Nintendo series there is, so for sure, this is enough. And I think if you look at it from just that perspective alone, then yes, it makes sense, but I think there's more to a launch than just a game that has huge sales potential. So for example, Super Mario Odyssey came out late into the year of 2017, October of 2017. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe came out April of 2017, in that second month of the Switch 1 era. But for that first year, Mario Odyssey was actually the better selling title. And so yes, over time, Mario Kart 8 has gone on to sell more than any other Nintendo Switch game, but that initial excitement, that initial draw, Mario Odyssey was stronger. It was a bigger deal game, at least for the first year of Switch 1. And so the ultimate point I'm getting at here is that Mario Kart is a big deal. This is a new game. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe wasn't even a totally new game when it came out, because it initially released for Wii U and just had some enhancements with some new content. And so I do think the draw here is going to be pretty exciting. But Mario Kart is also a series that appeals to a more casual audience. That's why it reaches such a large audience over time, because as more and more people buy the console, oftentimes Mario Kart is one of the first things they'll pick up. But for that first year of Switch 2, that initial audience, it's a more hardcore-centric audience, the kind of people that are going to get in line early in the morning or the night before to make sure they have a Switch 2. The kind of people that are going to be calling their Best Buys and GameStops every day just to see when the next shipments are coming in so they can get a chance to get the console early on. That is not the casual audience. That is not the kind of audience that's going to be buying Mario Kart all the time. And when I say that, I'm not saying that the hardcore audience won't also play Mario Kart. They will, but I do think you need a little bit more than that. And when you look at the history of Nintendo console launches, it's never just one game. Some examples: the Super Nintendo in North America launched with F-Zero, Pilot Wings, and Super Mario World. I'm just talking about Nintendo published titles, just so we're clear. The N64 launched with Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wings 64. The Game Boy Advance launched with Super Mario Advance and F-Zero Maximum Velocity. The Nintendo GameCube launched with Luigi's Mansion and Wave Race Blue Storm. The Nintendo Wii launched with Wii Sports, a pack-in, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, and Excite Truck. And most recently with the Nintendo Switch, it launched with, yes, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, but also 1-2 Switch. And on the eShop, Snipper Clips cut it out together. Every generation launch had multiple releases. I skipped a few just for the sake of time, but the point is, to expect just Mario Kart would be expecting something that's never happened before in history. So there's going to be more than just Mario Kart. But something else some of you may have picked up on as I was listing off some of these console launches is that oftentimes there is some kind of racing game, and it's been F-Zero or Wave Race in the past. Mario Kart is obviously a bigger series than those, but it does have me wondering what kind of other game or two will Nintendo position alongside Mario Kart to be the launch titles for Switch 2. And I do think the significance, the sales potential of Mario Kart should be factored in here, but it is just one element to the entire conversation. One game that I think some people might bring up here is, how about 3D Mario? There's always a 3D Mario in that first year for a new console, so why not 3D Mario in Mario Kart Day 1? Well, I think at that point there is way too much overlap, 2 major Mario games coming on the same day. I really doubt that would happen. There needs to be a little bit of a difference here. I would think Nintendo would actually save 3D Mario for the holiday season if Mario Kart is going to be the launch title. They should be divided by at least a few months. In the past, we've also theorized that maybe Metroid Prime 4 Beyond could be a launch title. And I think from the perspective of just having great variety early on, this is maybe the ideal game to put out alongside Mario Kart. The Metroid Prime series is one of the more mature, darker themed Nintendo series, while Mario Kart is a lot more bright and cheery. It appeals to a more widespread audience, including children, and Metroid is more for a slightly more mature audience. It's not going to be rated mature, it's probably going to be rated teen. But the point is that they kind of hit the two sides of the spectrum here. One is going to be a multiplayer game, and the other is going to be a big single-player epic adventure. One is a racing game, another is a first-person shooter. And so there are two very different games, and while one might say that coming on the same day could impact the sales for one or the other, basically people will be worried about Metroid Prime 4 not selling really well, given that it is the launch day for the console, if there's a time to come out with multiple games and expect success for multiple games, it is day one. As I just talked about, Nintendo would release multiple games throughout history to launch their consoles. And when we also factor that we already understand that the Switch 2, one of its unique functionalities is the mouse controls, and that would work really well for Metroid Prime 4, it being a first-person shooter, it might be the ideal game that Nintendo could put out there to fully showcase this technology, and having that showcase day one makes a lot of sense. So there is reason to think that maybe it's going to be Metroid Prime 4 Beyond and Mario Kart 9 as the 1-2 punch day one for Switch 2. I'm all about it personally. But I do also think that we should take into consideration that maybe Nintendo would not want to put out two big games like this. Mario Kart is guaranteed to sell no matter what. Metroid Prime 4, Nintendo's invested a lot of resources into, but there's no guarantee it's going to sell extremely well. Not to the same level of confidence as Mario Kart, and perhaps positioning it day one alongside Mario Kart might impact its ability to succeed, especially if there are other games coming out around that time as well, such as Doom Dark Ages, a game that's very similar to Metroid Prime. And so maybe Nintendo wouldn't want that kind of competition coming out at the same time as Metroid Prime. Maybe they'd want to save it for a little bit later into the year where it could have more of the spotlight for a little while. And so then if that's the case, what does Nintendo position alongside Mario Kart? Because typically there's some kind of adventure game, there's some kind of sporty multiplayer game, and there's some kind of game that shows off the console. Sometimes those elements are combined, sometimes they're all separate. Like, could there still be a 1-2 switch kind of like game. Because Mario Kart's already kind of a party game, but from what we understand of Mario Kart, it doesn't seem like there's anything about it that's going to really grandly showcase the abilities of the console. Now, there are some possibilities there, like what if this next Mario Kart has like a double dash mode or something where you can play cooperatively and it takes better advantage of the Joy-Cons, or what if there's a track editor where you will want to have a cursor so the mouse mode will make sense. Like, there are some possibilities where maybe it might make a little bit of a sense as a showcase for the hardware. But ultimately, I have myself thinking that Nintendo's probably going to want to have something else that's going to be kind of like that weird, wacky thing that shows off a whole bunch of different features of the system. So maybe there is another 1-2 Switch-like game, although personally, I don't really like 1-2 Switch or everybody 1-2 Switch. I thought they were kind of at best. They weren't that great to me. And they weren't the biggest sellers either, not compared to other games that Nintendo could potentially put out there, like Wii Sports or Switch Sports. It is believed that maybe there might be a follow-up to Switch Sports in development, so perhaps that's going to be launching day one for the console, a Switch Sports Resort or a Switch Sports 2. And here's just an idea. You might be wondering, well, okay, how would that showcase the abilities of the console? Well, it would still be using the motion controls for the Joy-Cons, but also, what if there's like a air hockey game or something like that, where you're playing on a board and then you can use the mouse Joy-Con to play air hockey or something like that. I think they could fit something in there that would make a lot of sense from that perspective. But then if we do get Mario Kart day one, and we do get a Switch Sports Resort day one, I think those titles would be great, but those both would be very multiplayer, party-centric kind of like games, and we still don't really have a dedicated adventure game. And maybe Nintendo's just willing to forgo that first month and just rely on third parties for that kind of experience, and maybe in month 2, then they release Metroid Prime 4 Beyond as a cross-gen title. Maybe that's the direction they go in. Or maybe there's another surprise title that Nintendo will put out there. And so, I recently thought about this, like literally last night. It occurred to me that it kind of made sense, and at first I thought, probably not going to happen, but there's something about it that I think makes a decent amount of sense. So, hear me out here. There were technical demonstrations reported about Switch 2 back in 2023. One was the Matrix Unreal Engine 5 demo, which supposedly showed off some advanced ray tracing effects that the Switch 2 would be capable of. And another was showcasing Breath of the Wild, running at a 4K resolution, as opposed to the 900p it is on Switch, also running at 60 frames per second, as opposed to the 30 it is on Switch, and having virtually no load times, as opposed to the occasional load times we see on Switch when we fast travel or enter a dungeon of some kind. All of that is just gone with this supposed technical demonstration. And then later on, from Midori, someone who has leaked a whole bunch of codenames for different Nintendo projects, some of which we've seen come to fruition, such as The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom and Super Mario Party Jamboree, one of those projects that was leaked was Yu-King-Oh. Yu-King was the codename for Breath of the Wild. Yu-King-Oh seems to imply that there is another version in the works, and we've already learned from the Terra leaks from the big info dump from Game Freak that the codename for Switch 2 is Ounce. So basically, what we understand is that there is a Switch 2 version of Breath of the Wild in the works. How Nintendo will put that together remains to be seen, because personally, I don't think it really makes sense to deliver Breath of the Wild as a remaster, as a big release for a particular month. I don't think that will go over well. Do I think it makes sense to repackage Breath of the Wild in a way that future-proofs it and allows it to continue to sell for years to come? Yes. But I don't think Nintendo announcing, hey, we've remastered Breath of the Wild, the visuals are now a little bit better, and it's going to be a launch title for Switch 2, I don't think that's going to be the kind of game that's going to get people to shell out $500 or what have you, the console plus the game and then taxes and such, right? I don't think that's what it's going to be. Unless this remaster is happening, maybe there is a physical release of the game, but also, if you already own the game, you can pay for a cheap patch to have the enhancement. Maybe they do the same for Tears of the Kingdom, that's a whole other debate. But something else that happens here is they release new content having to do with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Essentially, some sort of in-between adventure where Link and Zelda explore a new area, and this is something that's only coming out for Switch 2. It technically would not be DLC. They did confirm to us multiple times that there would be no DLC for Tears of the Kingdom, but this wouldn't be DLC. This would be an expansion story or an epilogue quest, very similar to some of the epilogue quests we get with the different Xenoblade games like Torn of the Golden Country or Future Redeemed or whatever they're going to be doing with Xenoblade Chronicles X. And it's not just Monolith Soft that puts out these different epilogue stories for their remasters and such. We've seen other Nintendo games have this, like for example, Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe with Magalore's Quest. So this kind of thing keeps happening with Nintendo remasters, the ambitious ones. And something like this might be a great way to fit in an exciting new adventure, but it wouldn't be as significant as a whole-on game, so maybe it could still fit alongside another Megaton like Mario Kart. I'm not going to go so far as to make this a prediction, I'm just mentioning it as something that makes some sense here, because I do think Nintendo does need to think about the variety they put out there. Some might say, hey, just one big game is enough, and maybe that's the case, but looking at Nintendo's entire history of console launches, there are always at least 2 published Nintendo titles, and I do think it would be weird to have Mario Kart and then Switch Sports Resort, because both of those would be party-like games. I think something should be a little bit more single-player focused. Now, maybe this Mario Kart game has a whole-on adventure story mode sort of element, or maybe the Switch Sports Resort has a whole-on adventure story mode-like element, and then all of a sudden, one of these party games or both is a little bit of both, and so it doesn't really matter that much at the end. It's just good games for people to play early on, and then other games will come out soon after from Nintendo that will fill whatever void there may be. The ultimate point is that I expect more than just Mario Kart, and what's cool about that is that Mario Kart on its own is also really exciting, but the idea of having Mario Kart and another high-quality Nintendo game and maybe another smaller title on top of that, I'm eager to see what that will be, especially if there's also going to be some big third-party stuff as well. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.